Lars's Gifts by J.P. O'Brien. Things on Sycamore Street were, at present, rather settled. It had been a particularly gruelling week at the Beacon for editor Benn Radcliffe, owing to the local elections currently ongoing in the neighbouring town of Millhaven. He had even been forced to spend his entire Saturday at the office, a crime against humanity of the very highest order. Luckily, there was still one day of the weekend left, and gorgeous sunny weather had been forecast. So, after treating himself to a lazy lie-in and a bacon and fried mushroom butty swimming in ketchup, Ben left his house for some much-needed fresh air. He was sporting flip-flops, khaki shorts that revealed his painfully pale knees, and a t-shirt with a faded, curly MS logo across the chest and a hole in one of the armpits. As Ben strolled along the road towards Arbour Park, soaking up the jovial birdsong, he noticed one of his neighbours in his front garden, eyeing his t-shirt with interest. "Morning," said the neighbour. He was someone with whom Ben had exchanged maybe 5 words in total. Then, pointing a finger, "Mountaintop Synthesis, cool band." Ben gave an impressed nod. "You know them?" The man raised an eyebrow and smirked to himself. Yeah, a little." Ben didn't quite understand the smirk, but after the relentless week of politics he'd endured, a palate-cleansing neighbourly chat about good music sounded like just the tonic. "Yeah, shirt's seen better days," he admitted. "But it would have to be more or less in shreds before I'd think of parting with it. This was 94 or 5, I believe. They came to the Forum. Great set. You know, I must have been at that show myself," said the neighbour. This revelation brought a delighted smile to Ben's face. "Wow, small world. Another MS fan on the very same street. Should have introduced myself sooner. Ben." "Pleasure, Ben. I'm Joe." The two men shook hands over Joe's fence before Joe jabbed a thumb back towards his house. "You know, I think I might still have 1 or 2 MS things kicking about in the old collection. Got a minute to have a look?" "Really? Yeah, I'd love to," said Ben, already stepping through the gate Joe was holding open. When Joe flicked on the lights of his rec room, Ben found himself looking at what any Mountaintop Synthesis fan would label a shrine. There were photos of the band performing, posters and framed t-shirts, a guitar hanging by the neck, the very same one being played in the photos, much to Ben's amazement, and 3 different gold records, each one adorned with a tasteful plaque marking the sale of 50,000 units. Ben was so dumbstruck he didn't even realise Joe had been offering him a beer the whole time. "How do you—" he said blankly, looking at Joe. Joe just grinned. "Wait a second, you're Joe Caldwell? The Joe Caldwell?" "How's it going?" Joe held out his hand for a shake again, but Ben just stared at it. "Ha! How long have you— I had no idea. This is crazy." Ben finally grabbed the outstretched hand and gave it several very brisk shakes. Joe chuckled to himself. "No idea at all we had rock and roll royalty on Sycamore Street." "Hardly," Joe blushed. "But I appreciate it, and thanks for continuing to sport the shirt, by the way. Don't spot too many of them out in the wild these days." Joe popped open a beer for Ben, who continued to stare open-mouthed both at the items covering the wall and the man standing in front of it. He was then treated to a running commentary of the collection while the bottle hovered in front of his lips. "That was Rio, the Roll On Hold Out tour, and that was when we supported Rush, 1996. Nice lads. That was in the studio in Hawaii for our last album." Ben explained how important their music had been to him in his 20s and recounted wearing out his Mountaintop Synthesis CDs while hammering away at his dissertation. How, as a young man, he would imagine himself playing in front of those same venues full of adoring fans. To this day, he couldn't help but think he'd gotten into the wrong line of work. When he reached the dregs of his bottle, he parked it on the bar and asked, "So, what are you working on now?" regrettably sounding more like a reporter than he would have liked. Not much," Joe said, rubbing the back of his neck and gazing off to the side. "Just sort of chilling out, I suppose." "Sounds nice." "It's okay. Reliving the old days sure makes me miss 'em. But anyway, what about you?" "Nothing anywhere near as interesting. I'm the editor over at the Beacon." "Vital," Joe nodded. Only day job stuff. In my own time, I'm trying to get my writing off the ground." He visibly brightened. "You know, I've often fantasized about doing something music-related, like a biography or something. Switching over to another topic like that might fire up the creative juices." To Ben's surprise, Joe waved the suggestion away. "I don't know about that. What kind of stuff do you normally write?" "Science fiction. It's fun to world build. I've written this book series about some scientist explorers taking humanity to a distant galaxy. Just need someone to read it now." "Could I?" Ben blinked in amazement. "I mean, if you'd like, I can bring you a manuscript." "Awesome, thanks." Ben tilted his head. "You really want to read it?" "For sure. Sounds right up my street, actually. And, you know, sitting around all day, well, it's not exactly good for the old brain cells." He tapped himself on the temple as he got up to visit the fridge behind the bar. Ben couldn't believe what he was hearing. When he had first started writing Post-Axiom in his dorm room all those years ago, possibly wearing the very same T-shirt he currently had on, he never would have imagined who would one day be asking to read it. He took the fresh beer that was being offered him and cast his eyes once again over the wall of memories. Miss Tiny had spent her sunny Sunday morning wandering around the stalls of the pop-up flower market with Lars before they relocated to a bench overlooking the river. There, they befriended the ducks, thanks largely to the remains of a slow-roasted lamb sandwich Lars was carrying in his bag. He had hoped to satiate the birds with just the crusts, but they made it clear they weren't leaving until they had the whole sandwich. "I'll do another lamb soon," he promised Miss Tiny, emptying the paper bag onto the ground. As had become customary for their dates together, Lars gave Miss Tiny a gift. This time, it was a heart-shaped box containing a beautiful carving of her favourite woodland creature, the badger. When she arrived back at her cottage, she closed the front door behind her and leant against it, taking a moment to once again admire the box. She brought it over to her dining table and placed it among the collection of other handmade objects from Lars. The carved storybook from their first walk together, a matching scarf and cardigan set in yellow and pink stripes, a set of 3 intricate bookmarks which he had carved to resemble her favourite Roald Dahl characters, and a knitted book cosy complete with the Penguin Publishing logo on the front. Miss Tiny didn't know why a book would need to be kept warm exactly, but she found it sweet. It was all so sweet. That night, however, was fitful. She tossed and turned as she dreamt of the collection. No longer just the small pile, but instead dozens of objects weighing down her dining table so much that its legs buckled. She turned to the front door to find a stream of yet more handmade trinkets tumbling through the letterbox and pouring in through the windows in the kitchen. She remembered frantically tearing through the newspaper classifieds in search of a bigger house, sufficiently sized to keep everything in, when she woke up with a start. When Miss Tiny got to school that morning, she couldn't stop yawning and could barely keep her eyes open. While brewing a green tea in the faculty lounge, she overheard a chorus of coos and awes coming from just outside the door. She wandered over to have a look. At the centre of the commotion was Catherine Evans, currently on maternity leave, proudly showing her new baby to everyone. While baby James was getting his fat cheeks prodded affectionately by art teacher Alice Calhoun, Headmaster Tony Burgess held the boy in his arms and brushed a few delicate strands of fringe away from his forehead. "He doesn't mind being handed around like this?" "Trust me," answered Catherine, shaking her wrists out. "He loves the attention." "Ah, Miss Tinsley!" bellowed Mr. Burgess when he saw the diminutive librarian trying to peer around the crowd of people. "Won't you come and meet the strapping young Master Evans?" The other teachers cleared a path to let Miss Tiny through. Baby James, who had not long before marvelled at the tremendous size of Lars Gunderson towering over his pram, now met eyes with this new individual, barely half the size of all the other people around her. With both hands, he reached out for her. "He likes you," smiled Catherine towards the librarian. "Would you like to hold him?" "Oh, no, I couldn't," Miss Tiny replied, stifling another yawn. "He's gorgeous, though." "Then allow me," said Alice happily, blowing bubbles with her lips and reaching out for the child. Mr. Burgess passed the baby over with pantomime reluctance. "How are you enjoying parenthood?" Miss Tiny asked Catherine. "Oh, I love it," This one is fantastic. Glad we didn't get one of the bad ones." The quizzical look on Miss Tiny's face caused Catherine to quickly hunt for a change of subject. "And how are things going with Lars? We spotted you two at the flower market yesterday." The mention of Lars startled Miss Tiny, not because the question was accusatory in any way, but because she couldn't help but recall her unsettling dream from the night before. She looked over her shoulder at the empty part of the faculty lounge, then lowered her already quiet voice. "Can I ask you something?" Catherine glanced at the crowd around them. Alice was blowing raspberries against baby James's belly, while all the other staff members delighted in the sound of the child's giddy laughter. "Alice, are you all right with him for a second? I'm dying for a sip of coffee." "Go!" On the quiet side of the faculty lounge, as Catherine selected her Mr. T mug from the mug tree, then helped herself to some coffee from the communal pot, Miss Tiny explained that she liked Lars a lot. "But, well, all his gifts are so lovely," Miss Tiny went on, wringing her fingers. "But he doesn't ever tell me his feelings. I don't know if he even knows how." As she took a sip, Catherine considered the problem, nodding ever so slightly to herself. Miss Tiny shifted her weight to one foot and then back again. "You think I'm making too much out of it, don't you? I know it. He's just the most gentle and kind man there is. It's silly for me to even think these things, really." Catherine raised an eyebrow and set her mug down. "Hey, firstly, your feelings are always valid. Secondly, it's no wonder you're noticing his lack of words." "It isn't?" "No, you're a librarian. Words are your entire raison d'etre." Miss Tiny smiled. "I suppose that's true. What's funny is that he can talk for hours if he wants. He'll tell me about his workshop, or fjord and snow. He's told me about his childhood, a bit about his grandmother. He loves talking about NASA for some reason. And he is such a good listener. I can share my own thoughts and feelings, and I know he is taking it all in. But when it comes to his emotions, he becomes so closed off. I worry that he's keeping me at a distance." "I see." "I just get the impression that I make him too nervous." Catherine gave a little grin. It was the grin of seeing something obvious. "You're concerned that he's not opening up to you. Have you considered that he's nervous precisely because he likes you so much?" "Perhaps," said Miss Tiny, but she kept her eyes firmly on her green tea. Once baby James had been put to bed that evening, Catherine cornered Tom in the kitchen. "Why do you want me to talk to him? It's got nothing to do with us." "But you're so good at this type of thing." "Am I?" "Absolutely. You were boasting for days about how you helped Adrian get over his nerves, how he only proposed because of you." "That was a fluke." "Would you just try? They make such a sweet couple, and I could tell how important it was to Miss Tiny." "Why did she come to you for advice, though?" "I don't know. I don't think she has that many friends of her own." "Maybe they kept losing her in a crowd." Then, when he realised that Catherine wasn't amused, "Sorry." But Catherine refused to concede her point. So, after they had finished eating, Tom wandered across the street and knocked gently on Lars's door. The Norwegian giant seemed surprised to find Tom there, but opened his door wide all the same. "Sorry to disturb you, old boy," Tom said. "I'm just looking to borrow a carpenter's square. One of our units is coming off the wall, and Catherine's assigned me to the job." "Come on through to the workshop," Lars said amenably, before turning his enormous back to lead the way. The workshop in the shed at the bottom of Lars's garden was full to the brim with tools and partially completed projects, but, Tom noted, still somehow contained the neatest workbench he had ever seen. He asked what Lars was currently making. "Oh, bits and pieces," Lars answered, lifting the right-angled tool off a peg on the wall. "I started on a step stool for Sophie, but then I got worried she'd think I was making a comment about her size, so I put that to one side. For now, anyway." "You're so—" Tom began, before managing to stop himself. Luckily, Lars didn't seem to have heard anyway. "Thanks. Don't have too many of my tools left anymore, unfortunately. You'd be surprised how much space babies take up." Lars responded with a good-natured shrug. Tom went on. "How many gifts have you made for her, then?" "Let's see," said Lars, gazing off into space and counting them out on his fingers. Oh, it'll be about a dozen, I'd say. Tom slapped a cheek in jest. Whoa, slow down. You'll make the rest of us look bad. Lars widened his eyes as if such a thought had never occurred to him. Tom thought he looked like a puppy being scolded. What I mean is, Tom continued hastily, there are other ways to show someone how you feel. Different methods, depending. Leaning too hard on gifts might actually detract from what you're trying to tell her. Lars took a seat on the stool beside his workbench and lowered his head. Despite towering over everything in sight, he somehow appeared to fold into himself. The stool's reinforced oak legs, Tom observed, were an elegant mix of strength and beauty. The truth is, Lars said quietly, I haven't really done much of this whole wooing thing before. Wooing? That's what Marigold calls it. Oh, I see, Tom chuckled. Lars wasn't laughing. I was a bit nervous, so I went to her for advice. She says I'm a romantic, that if I've made something, Sophie is bound to like it. Well, look, she does have a point. One former carpenter to another, the things you make are beautiful, without doubt. But on the other hand, Marigold is, 100 years old? 82, Lars corrected, oblivious to Tom's hyperbole. Right, she's 82. Do you not think that renders her dating advice a little antiquated? They did things very differently back in her day. Did you also wear a cummerbund and bring along some carnations? No. Exactly. He glanced down at Fjord and Snow, dozing patiently on the floor in their knitted attire. Don't believe Marigold when she says that's all women want. Well, what else should I do? Look, I don't normally like to involve myself in someone else's romantic affairs. He thought back to his conversation in the hospital waiting room with Adrian. I mean, I'm trying to cut down. Anyway, I'll only say this just because I think Marigold might have put some ideas in your head which may need a bit of balancing out. What does Sophie, what does she do? Lars wrinkled his nose. He wondered if there was a trap being concealed in such an easy question, but he answered anyway. She works at the school. She's the librarian. Right. So perhaps she's the kind of person that likes it when people express themselves, not with physical things, at least not all the time, but with words. The giant began wringing his fingers together. I'm not that good at that, he said. It doesn't make me feel comfortable. Well, that's okay, said Tom, putting a gentle hand on the giant's shoulder. You don't have to do anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, but you know what? What? Saying it doesn't make me feel comfortable is telling me how you feel. Lars raised his head and looked at Tom. Tom was sure he caught a glint of something in the larger man's eyes. It would be a few days before Ben crossed paths with Joe again, but during those few days he was decidedly more chipper than usual. Mrs. Grimbley, the ageing receptionist at the Beacon, could have sworn she even heard him whistling behind his closed office door. When he did eventually bump into Joe one balmy evening towards the end of the week, he was excited to find that his new friend had already finished reading the manuscript. I loved it, Joe announced. The atmosphere, the clash of ambition and paranoia. Oh man, I was sitting with my guitar until it got dark, noodling around, trying to emulate that exact same feeling. Ben was in shock. A smile plastered across his face as he absorbed this praise drew a chuckle from Joe. That's the kind of idea that's got legs, the former rock star added. Joe's words of validation stayed with Ben all the way up the street. He was riding such a high he didn't notice Imelda in her front garden, giving some attention to her irises. In fact, it was Imelda herself who had to snap Ben out of his trance just as he was putting his key into the front lock. Hello, she sang over the fence, with a perkiness that Ben hadn't observed in her in weeks. How's it going? He managed to respond. I should ask you the same thing. Here you are wandering along with a great big smile on your face. Anything worth sharing? Yes, in fact, he said, trying to match her energy. I gave one of my manuscripts to a neighbour, Joe. He loved it. By the way, did you know that's the Joe Caldwell from the Mountaintop Synthesis? You know, I heard someone used to be in some famous group or other, but I can't say I knew them. I was a huge fan in my 20s, still got one of their t-shirts. How fun! And I'm so glad he liked it. Well done you. As Ben returned his gratitude, he couldn't help but notice something different about Imelda. Her hair, usually in an impeccably neat bob, now tumbled loosely down the sides of her face. She must have noticed him looking, but rather than pat it down with her normal precision, she ran her fingers clumsily through it and made it even messier. Well, I have to say, I'm delighted to see you in such high spirits, she said. I know how low you were feeling at work last year. Thanks, that's sweet. You know, it's nice to chat like this again. I feel like things have been somehow off recently. I hope you don't mind my saying. Imelda looked bashfully at the floor. That responsibility falls squarely on me. Oh no, don't say that. I've been wrapped up in my own things too. Aren't we all? Ben let out a little hum of agreement. Well, why don't we make up for it? Do something soon. Have a proper catch-up. I'd like that. Ben let himself into his house with a satisfying sense of balance. Things seemed to be firing on all cylinders, he thought. It was only when he was back in the quiet of his kitchen that Imelda's comment about his work came to mind. It was funny how she had mentioned it when they had never really spoken about the newspaper before. A pensive crease running down the centre of his forehead, he moved to the kettle to make himself a cup of tea. While Joe had been consuming Ben's manuscript at a voracious pace in his easy chair downstairs, his son Rory was debating what to do with a loose key he had stumbled upon at the bottom of his wardrobe, his employee locker key from the Reptile Amphibian Emporium. In all the excitement of being fired, thanks to an escaped lizard that had then managed to eat one of Mr. Rockwood's racing pigeons, he had neglected to return it. To be honest, he could barely remember what was even inside the locker. He hadn't made a single use of it since his very first day on the job over 6 months ago, when he had dumped his starch-collared white dress shirt, worn on the advice of his father, whose own career had also never previously required one, following Mr. Salazar's tickled reproach that he needn't look so formal. The strategy of leaving the key in the bottom of his wardrobe and pretending he had never seen it lasted for a couple of days, until the guilt proved too much. He slowly walked the familiar route over to the Emporium after school and knocked on the already open door. When he tiptoed through it, he couldn't help but notice the shop was in a terrific state of disarray. The shelves of food and cleaning supplies were unkempt, several of the food bags evidently having been chewed through, their pellets spilling out onto the floor. The glass tanks along the wall were grimy, with a build-up of white sludge forming in their corners, and there was a strange, slightly unpleasant smell drifting into the shop from the door leading down to the stockroom. There was no sign of Mr. Salazar until Rory heard a clattering coming from somewhere in the back office. "Mr. Salazar?" he asked. After a moment, the manager's head poked around the door. His large brown eyes looked slightly panicked, but they brightened the moment he saw Rory. "Young Mr. Caldwell, what a pleasant surprise!" "Thank you. I'm sorry, but I just realised I still have my locker key. I didn't know I had it." "Oh, good of you to return it. Truth of the matter is, I hadn't even noticed. Been a bit of a madhouse around here, you see." Rory glanced around. He didn't even need to agree out loud. Mr. Salazar went on. "That pesky Savannah monitor that I had to take back has been causing 1 or 2 problems. Absolute catastrophe that he is." "Where is he?" "Well, he seems to have made a bit of a nest in the rafters of the stockroom. Blasted thing is just out of reach, without dismantling the entire shelving unit, that is. He seems to only emerge when I've locked up for the night. Crafty little pest." The lizard in question had survived through an entire winter without much difficulty. The warm, slightly musty air of the basement stockroom suited him perfectly. When he headed downstairs and opened up his long-disused locker in the corner, Rory found he had to pinch his nose closed. Sure enough, lurking inside was the starched shirt he had abandoned so unceremoniously, but there was also a little plastic sandwich bag containing some very mouldy, rock-solid crusts and an uneaten hard-boiled egg still in its shell, which Rory could now recall being too tense to stomach on his first day on the job. The odour of the egg and mouldy bread was enough to coax the normally nocturnal lizard out of his nest and onto the beams in the ceiling. "Mr. Salazar! He's come out!" Rory hissed up to the main part of the shop. He heard his former manager's footsteps come rumbling down the stairs. "Great work, lad," Mr. Salazar beamed. Rory looked around to see the man braced for action with a large fishing net in his hands. Timidly, the lizards slithered along the beam above their heads and shuffled onto a nearby shelving unit, observing them carefully. Rory tapped the egg against the floor, then peeled pieces of the cracked shell away. The smell was enough to make the boy's eyes water, forcing him to hold the egg at arm's length. Much to Salazar's delight, though, the creature climbed down an upright metal frame to investigate. "Keep him still," Mr. Salazar whispered. That's it. Okay, when I say, pull your arm back. Now!" Rory did as instructed and watched Mr. Salazar bring the net right down over the lizard, nibbling contentedly on the putrid egg. With Mr. Salazar's feet holding the handle of the net firmly in place, Rory felt a pang of sadness for the misunderstood creature trapped beneath. "What's your plan for him now?" he asked. His old boss scratched his head. "Well, he's not happy here." Rory looked up towards the amphibian's makeshift nest, then back at Mr. Salazar. "Okay, put it another way. I'm not happy he's here. I don't suppose you'd be willing to give him a decent home?" So, that evening, back in his room, Rory assembled the glass walls of a large tabletop enclosure that Salazar insisted he take. The lizard was sat in the middle of the carpet, acquainting himself with the myriad smells that his new home, a teenage boy's room, held. Leona, spinning around in Rory's desk chair, asked what he planned to call him. "Well, Salazar was just calling him Catastrophe, but I don't think that's all that fair. He's Salazar's catastrophe, not mine. He did kind of get you fired. I don't see it that way. And that's the other thing. The shop was a total mess. I think Salazar might regret firing me. Even without SC kicking around, he seemed to have his hands full. He did look weirdly happy to see me." "Well, it's not SC's fault Rotwood acted like a child." "Do you think—" Rory began, while Leona looked out of his window. "Do you think if I did ask for my job back, he'd say yes?" "There, that fox has come back," she said suddenly, tapping a finger on the glass. "I call him Antoine. I keep seeing him around." Rory wandered over to look out, searching from side to side. "I don't see anything." "He's right there, sitting in that shadow, just looking at us." Rory squinted at the spot Leona was pointing to. There was indeed a shadow cast by the bush, but Rory could only see fence panels. He looked at Leona out of the side of his eye. She was still smiling down at the empty space. He exchanged a glance with the lizard on the floor and shrugged. The lizard flicked out its tongue in agreement. "So do you think I should ask? Ask him for your job back? Why not? What's the worst that could happen?" The following day, having left SC basking under his heat lamp, Rory returned to the Emporium. He walked in to find two ladies tapping their feet at the counter, while a flustered Mr. Salazar hovered in the office doorway, holding up a finger and sweating into the phone. Barely a second later, another gentleman entered the shop behind Rory. Without batting an eye, Rory stepped behind the counter and confidently ushered the first customer forward. "Do you work here?" the woman asked, a little confused. "I'm helping out. What can I do for you?" When the unexpected rush was over, Mr. Salazar took a breath and offered Rory his sincere thanks. Rory asked his question, which was met with a mix of delight and barely concealed relief. "Of course you can come back." "Really?" "I never wanted to fire you in the first place. The man who called me up to complain was being totally unreasonable, I thought. Ridiculous, to be honest." "Yep," said Rory, rolling his eyes. "That's Rotwood." "Look, it was your first day." He waved a hand around. "I know as well as anyone that this place can be overwhelming sometimes. I could have guessed you'd never had a job before. Remember that daft shirt you came in wearing?" Rory looked at the floor, but Mr. Salazar gave him a sympathetic pat on the arm. "Don't worry about it. Mistakes happen. A similar thing happened to me, you know. My count of crickets was off, and I couldn't for the life of me work out what had gone wrong, so I just amended it. Actually, that was right around the time I decided to hire you. Listen, you're a hard worker, but covering things up is usually a lot worse in the long run." "Yes, sir." "You've learned your lesson, have you not?" Rory nodded. Okay. In future, if something goes wrong, just come to me. I promise you won't be in trouble. I know how much you like being here and how good you are at the job. So we can just move forward. What do you say? So, effective immediately, Rory was back at work. Mr. Salazar even allowed him to bring SC to the shop with him, provided he didn't chew through any more food bags. SC's bachelor pad remained up in the rafters of the stockroom, but he preferred to laze across Rory's shoulders most of the time. Mr. Salazar admitted it was nice the shop now had a mascot. When he heard him calling the lizard SC, Mr. Salazar asked what it stood for. Rory, thinking fast, said the first thing that came to his mind. Second chances. When they next met up, Miss Tiny couldn't help but notice Lars acting a little strangely. It was true that, as a large man, Lars had always been somewhat self-conscious about his sweat. But in preparation for their date at the ice cream shop, he had so drenched himself in aftershave, a juvenile attempt to cover up his nerves, that Miss Tiny's eyes started to water. Lars, seeing her repeatedly reach for her polka dot handkerchief, assumed she was crying. This made him even more nervous. What's wrong? He asked. Nothing, was all Sophie said, wiping her eyes. Tom had been right, Lars thought in between unsettled licks of his ice cream. Refusing to talk was truly torturous if you were on the receiving end. Look, he began at last. He raised a tree-trunk arm to rub the back of his head before realizing that it revealed an enormous patch of sweat in the armpit of his checked shirt and quickly lowering it again. Sophie raised her chin with a curious smile, and Lars forced out a chuckle. Nothing. Sorry. Unfortunately, the rest of their date was filled with long and uncomfortable silences. Luckily for Miss Tiny, the majority of Lars's aftershave scent had by now floated up into the mild evening air, but that no longer mattered to her. Anyone could tell there was something important on Lars's mind. After he had eventually walked her to the front door of her cottage, he said, You don't have a piece of paper, do you? Miss Tiny picked up the pocket-sized notebook sitting on the phone table beside her door, tore out the next blank page, and handed it to Lars along with a pen. He proceeded to wordlessly scribble a series of flicked marks and dots across the page, hand it over, sheepishly offer another sorry, then peck her softly on her hair and hurry away. She eyed the note with considerable confusion. They looked like the kind of symbols one might find on Viking stone monuments, but she couldn't even tell whether she was holding it the right way up. Then, with a flash of inspiration, she recognized where she had seen these before. She hurried to her dining table and picked up the carved storybook from her first date with Lars. Around the edge of the front cover was a string of the same characters, runes that, until now, she hadn't thought of as anything besides a pretty pattern. For the next hour, driven by an insatiable curiosity to learn what was in Lars's mind, Miss Tiny rummaged through every book in the house where she thought there might lurk some clue to the symbol's true meaning. But there was nothing. She let out an exasperated sigh, then, mostly out of boredom, she mentally clustered the symbols into groups of 5. She could do it 5 times with 1 left over. 26. Like the alphabet. She grabbed the pen again and wrote the alphabet out underneath Lars's runes on the paper and got to work deciphering the message on her storybook. You have been listening to the By Torchlight podcast. For more, visit patreon.com/bytorchlight or search By Torchlight on Spotify and YouTube.